Have you ever wondered whether something as simple as walking can actually lower high blood pressure? I mean, really lower it? Not in a motivational poster kind of way, not in a just move more kind of way, but in a measurable, biological, inside your arteries kind of way. Because most people hear that walking helps blood pressure and immediately file it away as generic health advice. The sort of thing you're told along with drink more water, sleep more, and stop stressing. Technically true, maybe, but so vague that it never becomes useful. And that's a shame because what walking does to blood pressure is much more interesting than that. So, I want to do something very specific with you today. I want to walk you through what high blood pressure actually is, what changes inside your body the moment you start moving, why walking works even though it looks too gentle to matter, and exactly how to do it in a way that gives you the best chance of seeing a real difference over time. Because once you understand the mechanism, once you see what walking is actually doing to your blood vessels, your nervous system, your muscles, your hormones, then this stops feeling like generic advice and starts feeling like a tool. And that's a very different thing. Now, I want to be honest with you right from the start. This is not going to be one of those videos that tells you to buy a smartwatch, hit 10,000 steps, and magically cure everything. I find that kind of content frustrating for the same reason I found the warm lemon water type of content frustrating in the last video. It takes something real, something biologically meaningful, and turns it into a slogan. Walking is not magic. But it is powerful, and the reason it's powerful is not because it burns calories. That's the part most people focus on. The real story is what it does to pressure inside your arteries. So let's build this from the ground up. The first thing we need to clarify is what blood pressure actually is. Blood pressure is the force of your blood pushing against the walls of your arteries. That's it. But inside that simple definition are several moving parts. How hard your heart is pumping, how narrow or relaxed your blood vessels are, how much fluid is moving through the system, how stiff the arterial walls have become over time, and how activated your nervous system is at that moment. When blood pressure stays high for long enough, your arteries stop experiencing blood flow as a smooth, healthy rhythm and start experiencing it as chronic mechanical stress. That stress matters. It changes the lining of the vessels. It makes the heart work harder. It increases the risk of stroke, heart attack, kidney damage, and other complications, which is why people call hypertension a silent condition. You usually don't feel it happening, but the physiology is happening anyway. And here's the part I really want you to hold on to. High blood pressure is not just a heart problem. It is a system problem. It is a blood vessel problem, a nervous system problem, a metabolic problem, sometimes a kidney problem, sometimes several of these at once. And walking happens to touch many of those systems at the same time. That is why it works. Let's start with what happens the moment you begin to walk. The instant your leg muscles contract, they start demanding more oxygen and more fuel. To meet that demand, your heart pumps more blood, but at the same time, your blood vessels begin responding in a very specific way. The inner lining of your blood vessels, the endothelium, senses the increase in blood flow, and in response, it releases substances that help those vessels relax, particularly nitric oxide, which is one of the key molecules involved in vasodilation. Vasodilation simply means the vessels widen, and when vessels widen, resistance drops. And when resistance drops, pressure has less reason to stay high. That means walking is not just exercise. It is a signal. It tells your circulation system, open up, relax, improve flow, reduce resistance. And what's remarkable is that this can begin from a single session. There's a phenomenon called post-exercise hypotension, which sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. After a bout of exercise, including walking, blood pressure can remain lower for a period of time. Not forever, not permanently from one walk, but lower for hours afterward. In some people, especially those starting with higher readings, that temporary effect can be meaningful. Now, that matters more than it sounds like it should. Because when something gives you a small dip once, that's interesting. But when you repeat that dip day after day, week after week, the body begins to adapt. Your vessels function better. Your autonomic nervous system becomes less tilted toward constant alert mode. Your heart becomes more efficient. Your tissues handle glucose better. And over time, your baseline pressure can come down. That is the difference between a walk and a walking habit. One is an event, the other is a training signal. And this brings me to the nervous system because I think this is one of the most overlooked parts of the whole blood pressure conversation. A lot of people live in a state of chronic sympathetic activation without ever using that phrase. Their body is on, a little tense, a little wired, a little constricted, stress hormones elevated, heart rate not necessarily extreme, but higher than it needs to be, breathing shallow, muscles tight, sleep inconsistent, and blood vessels slightly more narrowed than they would be in a calmer state. Walking, especially steady walking, has a way of interrupting that. Not instantly every time, not in some spiritual, mystical sense, but physiologically, rhythmic movement, controlled breathing, repeated muscle contraction, better blood flow, less sitting, less stress accumulation. All of that shifts the body away from constant fight or flight signaling and toward a more regulated state. When that happens, your vessels are more likely to relax. Your heart doesn't need to push against as much resistance, and your blood pressure can follow that shift. This is one reason walking often helps people beyond what the step count would suggest. Now, let me bring metabolism into this because blood pressure and blood sugar have a closer relationship than many people realize. After you eat, especially after a meal heavy in refined carbohydrates, your blood glucose rises, your pancreas releases insulin. If this pattern is repeated often, and if your body becomes less sensitive to insulin over time, that has downstream effects on vascular health, inflammation, and blood pressure regulation. Metabolic dysfunction and hypertension tend to travel together for a reason. Walking helps here too. When your muscles contract, they can pull glucose out of the bloodstream more effectively. They become a place for that incoming fuel to go. That means less pressure on the system after meals and, over time, better insulin sensitivity. Better insulin sensitivity is not just a blood sugar story, it is also part of a healthier blood pressure story. This is why short walks after meals are so interesting. They look small, they almost look too small to matter. 10 minutes? Really? But biologically, they're timed in a useful window. Right when your blood sugar would otherwise be climbing, your muscles start acting like a sink for some of that glucose. The effect is modest, yes, but modest done consistently becomes significant. And that is one of the recurring themes in real physiology. Small things repeated are not small. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, fine, walking helps, but what kind of walking are we actually talking about? Because there is a difference between wandering through a store for 7 minutes and walking in a way that gives your cardiovascular system a reason to adapt. This matters. When researchers and organizations talk about moderate intensity activity, brisk walking is usually what they mean. Not speed walking like you're late for a flight, not breathless power marching. Brisk. The easiest way to understand that is the talk test. You should be able to speak in short sentences but not sing comfortably. If you can sing, you're probably moving too slowly to get the full cardiovascular benefit. If you can barely get words out, you're probably pushing harder than you need to. That middle zone is where a lot of the benefit lives, and the numbers here are actually reassuring. You do not need heroic workouts. The common recommendation lands around 150 minutes per week of moderate activity. That can be 30 minutes, 5 days a week. It can also be broken up. 3 10-minute walks count. A 10-minute walk after breakfast, one after lunch, one after dinner, that counts too. This is important because one of the biggest psychological barriers people have is thinking exercise only counts if it happens in a large, perfect block. An hour, special shoes, dedicated route, full motivation. And then, because life is messy, it doesn't happen. Walking does not need perfection. It needs repetition. Let me also say something that I think a lot of people need to hear. There is nothing sacred about 10,000 steps. That number has become almost mythological, and for many people, it's useful as motivation. But it's not a biological threshold where 9,999 does nothing and 10,000 changes your life. Benefits start before that. For some people, simply going from very inactive to moderately active is where the largest jump happens. That's encouraging because it means the person getting 2,500 steps a day doesn't need to become an athlete by Monday. They need to become a little more active than they were last week, then a little more active than that. And this is where I want to talk about consistency over intensity because I think people often get this backwards. A
Small
single
sounding changes
exhausting
matter.
weekend
Macro
walk
hammering
followed
pulse
by
waves
5
striking
sedentary
artery walls,
days
then
is not
subtly
the same
softening into
as
lower force
regular
pulses.
moderate walking spread through the week. Your cardiovascular system likes repeated signals. Your blood vessels like repeated signals. Your glucose regulation likes repeated signals. Your nervous system likes repeated signals. The body adapts to patterns, not isolated acts of virtue. So, if your question is, what is the most useful walking pattern for lowering high blood pressure? Here is the answer in plain language. Walk most days of the week. Walk briskly enough that your heart and circulation know you are doing something. Now, I want to spend a moment on what walking does over the longer term, because the long term adaptations are where this becomes more than a temporary dip. Regular walking strengthens the heart. A stronger heart can move blood more efficiently. That means it often does not need to work as hard to circulate the same amount of blood. Regular walking also improves the flexibility and function of blood vessels, helps with weight control, supports better sleep, reduces stress burden, and improves insulin sensitivity. None of these effects are dramatic on their own, but together they push in the same direction. Lower resistance, better regulation, less strain, and that's why studies on exercise and blood pressure often find reductions not overnight, but over weeks and months. The body is remodeling its habits at the tissue level. That takes time. Usually, people need to think in terms of several weeks to a few months, not 3 walks and a miracle. But when the habit is sustained, the change can be measurable. That brings me to a mistake I think people make all the time. They judge walking by how hard it feels rather than by what it's doing biologically. Because walking is gentle, people underestimate it. But gentle and ineffective are not the same thing. Your arteries do not care whether the exercise looks impressive. Your blood vessels do not care whether there was a gym membership involved. Your endothelium does not care if the movement came from a treadmill, a sidewalk, a hallway, or a park path. What the system responds to is repeated blood flow, repeated muscle contraction, repeated metabolic demand, repeated signals to adapt. That is what walking provides. Now, if I were putting this into one practical sequence, one actual daily pattern, it would look something like this. Start where you are, not where you think a healthy person should be. If you currently do almost nothing, begin with 10 minutes a day, really. 10, but make it intentional. Walk with purpose, let your arms move, let your pace come up, then build from there. If you can already manage that comfortably, move toward 20 to 30 minutes a day on most days of the week. If a single 30-minute walk feels hard to fit into your life, split it. 10 minutes after meals is an excellent structure because it's practical, it helps with consistency, and it pairs movement with a biologically useful time of day. Start each walk a little slower for the first few minutes. Let your body warm up. End the same way. Don't go from completely still to aggressively fast and then stop on a dime. Ease in, ease out. Pay attention to the talk test. That is one of the simplest and most useful intensity tools you have. And then give it time, not 2 days, not one motivational week, time. Because this is another thing the human body does that I find genuinely encouraging. It responds to support more quickly than many people think. Not always dramatically, not identically for everyone, but faster than the average person assumes. Better blood flow signaling, better glucose handling, lower stress load, improved conditioning. Those changes start accumulating as soon as the pattern becomes real. I also want to say something carefully here. Walking can be a very strong tool for high blood pressure, but it is not a substitute for personalized medical care, and it is not something to use as a reason to ignore dangerously high readings or symptoms that need professional attention. The value of walking is not that it replaces everything. The value is that it is one of the most accessible ways to push your biology in the right direction. And accessibility matters because the best intervention in the world is useless if people can't actually do it. Walking does not require a perfect schedule. It does not require a gym. It does not require athletic identity. It does not require you to become the kind of person who loves exercise. It only requires a decision and then another decision the next day and the next day after that. That is what makes it so powerful. So if you remember just one thing from this video, let it be this. Walking lowers blood pressure, not because it is dramatic, but because it changes the exact systems that create pressure in the first place. It helps your blood vessels relax, it improves blood flow, it makes your muscles use fuel more effectively, it calms the stress side of your nervous system, it strengthens the heart over time. And when that happens regularly enough, the number on the monitor can start moving in the right direction. Not by magic, by mechanism. So if this video helped you see walking a little differently, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you want, leave a comment telling me what would be easiest for you to start with: one longer daily walk or 3 short walks after meals. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.